yeah. That's a specific chance to apply the negative resistance. Yeah, no, it's like 20,000. As I promised, this is the damage calc. It's a bit much and it's a bit complicated, but I'm gonna try to explain it all. So first of all, like a short explanation. What we have basically is we have base damage, we have some additions, like some stuff gets added, like strength. That gets multiplied with some factors. That gets added by some other damages, mostly from enchantments, and all of that gets multiplied again. So this is the basic structure, and we can also think of this structure a bit differently. I think it's easier to think about the whole thing like this, even though it's slightly simplified, and there's one exception I found where this doesn't apply. But it's probably easier to think about it like this. So you have some multipliers that work on everything and some multipliers that work on everything except for enchantment damage. Alright, now let's go through the list. This is just ordered, so we're actually going from top to bottom, like through the calculation. So first of all, you can of course change your base damage on your weapon by just using a different weapon that has more base damage. The biggest base damage I've seen was the Sentient Great Cleaver. There might be a different sentient weapon that has more base damage, but the Great Cleaver has other reasons that speak for it. We come back to that probably. Alright, then Operation 0. You have strength, you get +3 per level. You can get up to strength 4 with battle burritos, but you get some extra potion effects that you might not want. So usually you would get to strength 3, so +9, with wine or whatever. And then the fire gauntlet, or each fire gauntlet gives you pretty much an extra strength level without increasing the strength level. So it also gives you +3. And they go into the ring bauble slot, so you can have 2 of them. There's some stuff that goes on Operation 1, mostly Sinful. You can have Sinful 3 with the Gluttony Pendant, usually. Sinful 4 from the Rust Pendant. And Sinful 6 if you eat a whale burger with a Gluttony Pendant, but that's a bit silly, a bit much effort. I've not done it yet. I'm actually still struggling understanding the whole fishing mechanics that this is built from. I actually have to fish whales. It's kind of crazy. Okay, then you have multiple races. Interestingly, some races are in Operation 1 and some in Operation 2. I don't know why. But that means if you have a dragon race, that gives you essentially an extra level of Sinful. So this is like Operation 1 means you don't get, like, if you have Sinful 4, then you have ×2. And it's not like when you have Dragon Race, it's ×1.25 on top. But you have actually, like, it's added. So it's ×2.25. So essentially the Dragon Race is 1 Sinful level more. For attack damage, you obviously don't get the extra armor. Same with Goblin and Elf, those give 1 Sinful level less, and Rough Race gives, well, +10%. So something like this if you have Sinful form. Then some stuff has Operation 2. The Scarlet set, it's a hidden set, you get it with the Mimic stuff, whatever. Gives you Rage 4, which does 40% more damage, so ×1.4. Masterful Quality gives you 15% extra damage. Each menacing modifier gives you 8% damage extra. Then the strengthening or the punishing quality gives you 3% extra per bauble. Those are independent. If you have 7 menacing qualities, you don't have 7 times 8, which is 56, so not this, but you have this. Gets multiplied. Then the Failures clause is actually kind of insane. It's just 1.25 plus 25% damage. Pretty nice. Usually if you have to choose between a Failures Claw and a Fire Gauntlet, in almost all cases, the Failures Claw wins. You can't have two, otherwise you would also take two. Now Fairy Race and Titan Race, like either give you a quarter or double damage. It just gets multiplied on everything. Then if you have a weapon in your offhand and attack with that by right clicking, then you only do 50% damage. Then you can do a vanilla crit. I don't know the chances, but they are kinda low. You get 50% extra damage, gold armor or gold bookworm armor, and a gold weapon. Then you do either 50% extra or 100% extra, depending which armor set you have. This is also here, so not the enchantment damage, but like the base damage and this added stuff gets multiplied. Then we get to the added damages from the enchantments that are not, like, this is all the stuff that now gets added, which doesn't get multiplied by all the stuff that came before. Steel gives 2 extra damage to nether mobs, and for some reason this is actually supposed to be here, which is kind of weird, but since it's just +2 and the vanilla crit doesn't do much to it, like this would be +3 for a crit, and the gold weapon bonus doesn't apply, so it doesn't matter. I just put it here because it makes more sense. Then Murmec's weapons have +4 to almost everything, which is pretty undervalued. Like, mid-game, this is a really good choice, especially since if you have a Murmec Stinger, you can also always poison enemies on hit, which nicely works together with the Poison Stone, which is kinda cheap to make. Then all the subject enchantments on their max level, so 4 for English and Science and 5 for PE, give +2, that's like sharpness 3. Don't use subject PE, as always. Supreme Sharpness, +12. Pretty nice. This is just here because this also increases damage, but that's on a hoe, so it doesn't matter. Then Spellbreaker, I still have to check that. This seemed to not be right. It's supposed to only give extra damage on witches and evokers, but apparently it also changes damage depending how many potion effects the enemy has, and that could, like, this is incompatible with Supreme Sharpness, and it could be better than Supreme Sharpness in some cases where you apply a lot of debuffs on the enemy. Mortalitas gives +8 after you killed 160 mobs with that weapon, but this is incompatible with some other stuff we want to use, mostly Viper and Ash Destroyer. Penetrating Edge is incompatible with Wound Piercing capabilities, so we won't use it. It gives, if the enemy has at least 3 armor points. Enemies don't have body parts, so they just have total armor points. You see that when you see the health bar on the top right. If the enemy has at least 3 armor, you get 1.46 damage flat, and then the amount of armor divided by 3. Clear Sky, as usual, I'm a big fan. You get either +5, -3.6, or ±0, depending on the conditions. Purging Blade is a new addition to the list. It's supposed to just remove buffs and debuffs, but what it also does is it multiplies damage. It's times 1.2, so 20% extra, and you get 5 magic damage on the side for 40% chance. Also, it removes debuffs or buffs, and like, you have a chance to remove all active potion buffs from the enemy in the same hit, or none of them. This kind of interferes with Viper and Envenom, that's why it's kind of bad, but at the same time the 20% extra damage is pretty cool. and with 40% chance for it, it's still like 8% extra damage if you like average it out. And that's still usually more than the +8 does on with Viper, especially on parasites where this +5 doesn't work because parasites can't be poisoned. But yeah, Dark Shadows is the alternative for Viper. There's only those two alternatives for this group in so many enchantments. Dark Shadows, in the best case where you and the enemy are in block light 0, does +2.25, which is just horrendous. Especially if you compare it with the +8 from Viper, so you never choose that. Then you have Viper, +5 from Poison, +3 from Wither. Parasites only get the +3 from Wither. Usually you combine it with Envenomed, because Envenomed has a 100% chance to give the enemy poison. And Wither Poison Stone gives you 40% damage extra on enemies that are poisoned. Parasites can't be poisoned, so you don't use the Poison Stone on parasites. Menu Sneak attack damage, that only works when the enemy hasn't detected you and you're sneaking. Then you can get up to times 2.5 damage. Menu Extra Damage gives you up to 50% extra damage. Then you have an extra critical strike from the L menu. This is not the vanilla crit, especially since it works also on enchantments, but it also has its own time, its own random number generation. This works totally separately. You can have both crits at the same time, you can have none of them, you can only have one of them. Then you have combo that only works on nunchucks. That increases for every hit. I forgot how many hits you have to do, but it increases up to 1.4. So 40% extra damage if you keep attacking, so if you keep holding down the mouse button. And you have to see, like, this is exponential stuff. Like, if you multiply stuff together, like, all those effects stack on top of each other. It's crazy. Then you have the two-handed damage loss from Spartan. So if you have a two-handed weapon, if it's two-handed 1, then you have times 0.75. If you have two-handed 2, it's 0.5. Of course, only if you have an item in your offhand. Alright, then Ash Destroyer multiplies the whole damage by 2. You get double damage from nothing. The enemy has to burn, so it can't be fire resistant. So I heard, I haven't tested that the Lycanite bosses are immune to fire, so this wouldn't work on them, but they have a 100 damage cap anyway, so with every hit you can only do maximum 100 damage. You do that anyway in most cases, so it doesn't matter. By the way, speaking of Lycanite bosses, I just tried that. I thought that maybe critical strikes would be a good choice there, because Ash Destroyer is incompatible with Fiery Edge, and Fiery Edge bypasses invincibility frames on enemies, so you can hit faster than twice per second, which is the vanilla invincibility frame, like 10 ticks, half a second. Iframe bypass stuff, like, bypasses that. You have that in Fiery Edge, and you have that in Swifter Slashes. Swifter Slashes 5 has 10% chance, and Fiery Edge has, like, I forgot, maybe also 10%. Doesn't matter though, because for the Lycanite bosses that doesn't count, and most other mobs you just one-shot anyway. And trading that against double damage on everything is just a bad trade. I've had that as a comment sometimes, like people said, oh, crit strike, Fiery Edge, isn't that really important? Kind of, but double damage is better. Of course, somewhere in mid-game, maybe you can calculate it to be better, I don't know, if you don't have all the other extra multipliers. Wound piercing capabilities moves all to damage bypasses armor, whatever, it just bypasses the enemy armor calculations, so it doesn't matter how much armor the enemy has. We already talked about damage reduction via armor that can reduce up to 80%, so you really want this. Alright, and then of course, if we talk about wound piercing capabilities, we should also talk about penetration enchantment. Penetration is really, really bad, and I'm sorry that I had a video on my channel, I disabled it now, where I enchanted nunchucks with penetration and said it was perfect. Whoops. Penetration is really bad because it moves 70% of the damage out of the calculation pretty early. So stuff like lifesteal and other multipliers like Ash Destroyer don't work on it anymore. So essentially you heal less and you do less damage. Of course, if you only get penetration and not rune piercing capabilities, it could be still better than not using penetration, but I really don't recommend it. Another interesting fact for penetration is that it achieves that armor bypassing not by using this vanilla function, but by making the damage indirect magic damage. And that means that stuff that increases magic damage also increases the penetration damage. So if you drink the magic focus potion, there's one you can make with dragon blood, I think. Then you can do extra damage with that. Also gold armor. So yeah, but overall just don't use penetration. Next, potion effects on the enemy that change the damage. There's Defied Lance vulnerability that gives plus 20% per level. Only the Ravager can shoot pellets that does this kind of vulnerability. I'm actually not sure which level it applies on. I think 1 or 2. I think it's 1. So it's not much, but you could do it. Then Lycanite's penetration, 0.25 per level. You can apply that with some Lycanite tools by hitting the mobs. I think the Xephen base part and some other part apply that. You can search that in the JI. And if enemies stand in acid, then they get penetration. Then there's Potion Core vulnerability. You can make that potion, I think, in the potion brewer. I don't know the recipe. And you could dip your weapon in that, or you could just use the Sentient Great Cleaver that does vulnerability 2 for a certain chance. I think it was 1 in 5 or something, or 1 in 4, I forgot. But yeah, it gives vulnerability 2, so that gives minus 50% damage resistance, which is essentially just times 2 damage. It just stacks together with resistance. So if the enemy has resistance 1, so plus 15% damage resistance, and vulnerability 1 minus 50%, and just those percentages add together because it's on the same attribute, but whatever. That's just very rare occurrences. That only works on the second hit. The rest also works on the first hit. You can also get the potion dipping thing. You can get vulnerability 2. Alright, as a parasite's viral, you can't apply that anymore. That was on the Sentient Great Cleaver before it was vulnerability, but it was removed because it's stacked on itself. That does plus 100% per level. This is just a warning. If you're in those cities, watch out for your rival levels. Already being close to a green mob, they just give you rival when you are close to them, which is a bit dangerous. But yeah, each level gives you plus 100%, so rival 1 is times 2, rival 2 is times 3, etc. Alright, then we have a very weird one, Desolator from so many enchantments. Desolator 4 gives enemies negative resistance, namely negative 3 resistance, which essentially is not 55% less damage, but more damage, so times 1.45. And this stacks in a bad way with vulnerability, so this is minus 45% damage resistance, and this is minus 100% if you have 2, so together it doesn't multiply together, but add, so it's 145% if you use both of this. Desolator only goes on axes, so you would usually run a build where you have an offhand axe or battle axe with Desolator on. Also, Desolator is incompatible with Envenomed, so even if you run a battle axe main hand build, you would have to choose between plus 3 damage via Viper and Envenomed against parasites versus times 1.45 on second hit for a specific chance that I forgot. I think it was 32% chance. That's definitely a possibility you can go for. But yeah, then the enemy armor calc, which we ignore via wound piercing capabilities. So all of this before comes into the enemy armor calc. You always have to say where the armor calc is, because stuff after the armor calc is worse in a way. You want to overload the armor calc. Like, the more incoming damage you have into the armor calc, the less the armor calc works. So the armor works better for lower incoming damages. The higher the incoming damage, the less good it works. Everything that comes before is better. But it doesn't matter anyway, because Inner Berserk and Revive Blade are the only things that come after the armor calc. You have Inner Berserk, you put that on your chest plate, you get up to times 2.3 or plus 130%, depending how much your own health percent is. So if you have full health, Inner Berserk doesn't do anything. If you have 0% health, which is unrealistic, but let's say that, you would have times 2.3. And it scales linearly in between. So if you have 50% health, then you have times 1.65. That usually doesn't happen because, well, maybe it happens in mid-game, but in end-game I would doubt it's useful to even enchant this on, because you heal so much. You really don't need extra damage depending on your own health percent, because you're always full health. And then Rewild Blade we don't use, because Rewild Blade again is incompatible with Ash Destroyer and Quit Strikes and Luck Magnification. Same deal, just that it's the enemy health percent, and the lower the enemy health percent again, the higher the multiplier. I don't know any place where this would help. This means, in theory, if you have a mob that has a lot of HP and it doesn't have a damage cap like the bosses, like the Lycanite end bosses, you would deal more damage the lower the HP is. So you would every hit would deal a bit more damage. But there's just no place where this is helpful, and it really interferes with Ash Destroyer, which is really, for my taste, the winner of all of this. Like, I really want to accentuate that you really don't want anything else from the group. Like, you have Ash Destroyer versus Critical Strikes versus Revive Blade versus Luck Magnification, and Ash Destroyer 100% wins. In the other video with the enchanting, I said this works on iced weapons. I say it again, it works on iced weapons. You don't have to use a flamed weapon for this to work. You just need any fire aspect that stacks with this. Vanilla fire aspect doesn't work, fiery edge doesn't work, but lesser, advanced, and supreme fire aspect works. As far as my testing went, lesser fire aspect 1 didn't work. That might be too short. This is just one tick. Well, one fire tick, 1 second, and that's probably too short, because the first fire tick never works. It's not really on fire. Yeah, and that's it. That's the whole calculation. It's a lot. It's a mouthful. I thought about making like a diagram, but that's too complicated. I don't see how I would put this on a diagram. I hope this was still kinda understandable. There's actually an interesting effect somewhere in here hidden that makes you able to do up to 500,000 damage, or more even if you have a bit of luck with the crits. The enemies can only have up to 69,420 HP. Of course you can override that, and then you can see that you can do more damage. You definitely can hit for 10,000. That definitely works. But yeah, thanks for watching. Bye bye.